At the end of the day, movies are all about manipulation, about flashing 24 frames per second in front of the viewer's eye to give the impression of movement and, ultimately, storytelling. Films are inherently an extremely sophisticated feat of tricking the brain, and there are countless other ways that filmmakers attempt to deceive viewers into feeling and thinking certain things. And perhaps at its most insidious level, this might even involve using a bevy of cinematic techniques to make the audience feel like they just watched a much better movie than they actually bloody did. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 terrible movies that tricked you into thinking they're good. Number 10. Now You See Me. It's quite fitting that Now You See Me, a movie about a team of magicians who pull off elaborate bank heists, is something of an elaborate magic trick itself. Directed with undeniable slickness, this heist actioner is nevertheless as style over substance as it could possibly bloody get. From the glossy cinematography to the snappy editing, this is a film that presents itself as 2 steps ahead of the audience at all times, no matter that it's actually a depressingly shallow piece of work lacking even a single truly impressive or plausible on-screen magic trick. There's an unintended meta layer to this movie, that the production itself is a smoke and mirrors act, attempting to compensate for a profoundly not smart, regularly stupid script, which is punctuated by an inane twist ending, but comes alongside a battery of neat visuals. And evidently it worked. Despite mixed reviews, Now You See Me grossed over $350 million globally against a mere $75 million budget, leading to a sequel which bafflingly repeated a similar level of success. Number 9. American Hustle. Hollywood and audiences were basically high on anything that David O. Russell had to offer after the Oscar-winning success of David O. Russell, enough that humanity collectively agreed to pretend that his much-anticipated follow-up American Hustle was actually a good, even a great movie. Yet ultimately, Russell's adaptation of an FBI sting operation of the late 1970s and early 1980s felt like an SNL parody of a Scorsese movie, an impossibly pleased with itself star-studded crime comedy that bafflingly nabbed 10 Oscar nominations, yet fittingly won none. It's a dreadfully inert telling of a fascinating real-life story, which successfully convinced audiences and Oscar voters alike that it's considerably more interesting than it actually is, through a smug, slippery script which playfully toyed with the notions of truth. The acting is generally fantastic for sure, no matter Jennifer Lawrence's flagrant miscasting, but when the effervescence of the performances fizzles away, you're left with an unimaginative sub-Scorsese joint that quite fittingly fell straight into the pop culture ether as soon as Oscar season passed. I mean, seriously, if you're thinking about defending this film, when's the last time you actually thought about it before this? Number 8. Jurassic World. Movies can often benefit from low expectations, when the audience has lost enough faith in a franchise that anything hovering around or slightly above awful ends up surprisingly well received. And so we come to Jurassic World, which released almost 15 years after the shambolic franchise-obliterating Jurassic Park 3, and was widely touted as a major return to form, a glossy, soft reboot which updated the series' formula for modern tastes. With rising filmmaker Colin Trevorrow in the director's chair, some of the writers of the recent Planet of the Apes films penning the script, and a solid ensemble cast, it had everything it needed to be great, right? Well, while Jurassic World wasn't as insultingly brain-dead or cut to shreds as Jurassic Park 3, it was still a mostly soulless action blockbuster which lazily coasted off the audience's enduring goodwill for Steven Spielberg's original film. Dinosaurs, Chris Pratt, just switch your brain off and enjoy the ride. Except considering how genuinely masterful the original Jurassic Park still is, the IP deserves so much better than this aggressively, creatively bankrupt, cynically nostalgia-baiting slop. And the worst thing of it all, the 2 Jurassic World sequels, god damn, they were even worse. Number 7. Tenet. Christopher Nolan's Tenet certainly benefited from being the first major Hollywood blockbuster released in months due to the pandemic, and audiences were so starved of huge-scale tentpole content that even this profoundly frustrating piece of work was generally praised. As much as Nolan's Inception is often regarded as a film that makes the audience feel smart, Tenet goes the opposite way. It's a movie that makes them feel dumb, or at least that the movie's smart and they just need to watch it a few more times to actually get it. Now, Tenet is impressive as a technical achievement, but does that make it a good film? Absolutely not. Its jumbled, exposition-heavy narrative, made worse by a frustratingly muddy sound mix, is a chore to get through. But because Nolan is a singular auteur filmmaker, we're supposed to accept his work as visionary rather than, well, an example of a director sniffing their own farts. Nolan is a canny manipulator, that is for sure, but do not be fooled by the peerless practical filmmaking. Tenet is a film that paradoxically feels both overstuffed and totally empty outside of its spectacle. Number 6. Skinnamarink. Skinnamarink is unquestionably the year year's biggest indie horror sensation so far, an experimental horror film produced for just $15,000 by filmmaker Carl Edward Ball, which amid positive word of mouth from film festival screenings and a pirated copy of the film leaking online has grossed more than $2 million. Skinnamarink is entirely set inside a house as two young children wake up in the middle of the night unable to find their father as the doors and windows of their homes start vanishing. The film is expanded from Ball's 29-minute 2020 short film Heck, and while it's certainly great to see a low-budget filmmaker enjoying surprise commercial success, Skinnamarink is yet another example of an artsy horror film movie hyped to the heavens by industry filmmakers, tastemakers, but receiving a far more hostile response from general audiences. As atmospheric as this film is, it's ultimately an intriguing half-hour concept that has been dragged out to an excruciating 100 minutes, as Ball struggles to populate the extended runtime with much of interest. It's a film that benefited immensely from viral marketing and the much-stated claim that it was something truly different for the horror genre, enough that nobody really wanted to seem like a Philistine by just admitting that it's basically rather boring. Number 5. Green Book. While a good portion of moviegoers will take a Best Picture Oscar win as ultimate proof of a film being objectively good, that is obviously not the case. I mean, just look at the Green Book. From one of the filmmakers behind Dumb and Dumber and There's Something About Mary comes a painfully simplistic race relations drama that begs white audiences to pat themselves on the back as they consider, why can't they all just get along? As compelling as the respectively Oscar-nominated and Oscar-winning performances are from Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali are, Green Book treated its fraught, loaded subject matter with kid gloves, packaging it into painfully gooey, feel-good nonsense that filtered a profoundly black story through the experiences of a white man, because of course it did. Within minutes of Green Book winning Best Picture, critics busily began comparing it to Crash's equally eyebrow-raising 2006 win, and even barely 4 years after Green Book triumphed, many commentators have deemed it one of the worst and most poorly aged Best Picture winners ever. While there's no denying that the pushback against the film would have been considerably less severe had it not won the grandest honor in Hollywood, it is a film that felt profoundly dated and ill-intentioned the moment that it hit the screen. Can we please just leave these aggressively naive, yawn-inducingly broad films about race back in the 90s where they belong? Or if you're gonna do it, at least challenge us a bit more, come on. Number 4. The Cell. Tarsem Singh's directorial debut, The Cell, is unquestionably visually stunning, but would you expect anything less from one of the 1990s most prolific music video and commercial directors? And fittingly, The Cell feels like a 107-minute music video. Stylish, superficially intriguing, and completely lacking in context or nuance that might let it have any staying power whatsoever. It's a textbook example of a movie that feels like the visual ideas were all conceived first, and then a screenplay was hurriedly reverse-engineered around the sparse, often ill-fitting concepts. It's a film less about the sum of its parts, the two-dimensional characters and confusing, self-consciously edgy story only further making this unwieldy mashup of The Matrix and The Silence of the Lambs feel like a teenage boy's wet dream that was bafflingly bankrolled to the tune of $33 million. The Cell still has its many defenders to this very day, but behind its eye-wateringly pretty facade is a limp nothing burger of an actual movie. Number 3. The Greatest Showman. Ooh, this is gonna get a lot of hate. If this movie's box office is any indication, The Greatest Showman might actually be director Michael Gracie, who despite producing an aggressively generic, shamelessly whitewashed account of P.T. Barnum's life and times, managed to spin it into a global phenomenon grossing over $430 million, while winning both Golden Globes and Grammys for its music. And it's truly a testament to how annoyingly infectious The Greatest Showman's music is, that audiences were basically gaslit into believing that the dramatic meat of the movie was just as fun and entertaining. Those catchy, toe-tapping tunes helped buoy a fundamentally twee, cornball, feel-good movie that had no interest in actually engaging with the dirtier truth of Barnum's story, burying it underneath a more cloying and family-friendly dramatic treatment. Yet even those who generally loathed the film would struggle not to hum along to tracks like The Greatest Show and This Is Me, and so the songwriters here probably could be credited with the lion's share of this movie's success, which cast a stupefying spell over audiences, because if you strip that back, what really is left here? Number 2. Elvis. Decades from now, film historians will rack their brains trying to explain how Baz Luhrmann's super strange Elvis Presley biopic received 8 Oscar nominations, including 1 for Best Picture. But Luhrmann spun quite the yarn to trick audiences into believing that the movie was good. Far beyond its nauseating, inexplicably Oscar-nominated editing, it comes down to just one man, Austin Butler. Butler gives such a mesmerizingly transformative performance as Presley that he elevates basically everything else around him, save perhaps for Tom Hanks, who in a rare off-key turn renders Presley's manager Colonel Tom Parker as a grotesque, laughable caricature. Butler's performance is deserving of a much better movie, there is no question about that, yet the seductive allure of his work here, which practically feels like summoning the king of rock and roll himself, creates a tide that raises the entire project. Take away Butler's performance though, and Elvis is yet another mind-numbingly over-directed effort by Luhrmann, with a script that basically feels feels like a checklist of Presley's Wikipedia page. And number 1, Elita Battle Angel. Now this was a film that everybody wanted to be good, given that it had been James Cameron's pet project for more than 15 years before it finally released in 2019, with Robert Rodriguez taking over the directorial reins. With stunning visual effects and a script co-written by Cameron himself, what possibly could have gone wrong? Well, if you remove the admittedly impressive technical spectacle, especially the motorball sequence, you're left with an often embarrassingly poor piece of storytelling. Were it not for the shiny effects, this film would have been far more easily exposed as the brain-dead manga adaptation that it actually was. From the overwhelming tide of expository dialogue to the risible romantic subplotting, this was a film desperately in search of a soul, which is rather ironic given the subject matter. And since it underperformed at the box office, we've been inundated with a bevy of "it's actually good, seriously, please give it another chance" think pieces. But one has to ask why anyone thinks this genuinely. I mean, have you ever watched this movie again since 2019? Do it, and then come back to us. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 terrible movies that tricked you into thinking that they're good. Now, before we go into the MPs here, if you liked any of these movies, then good for you, my friend. Like what you like. This is just our opinion, and remember, we've all got one. So feel free to voice your thoughts down in the comment section below. Big love to you, my friend. And if you want to chat to me further on the social medias, you can do so over on Instagram, where it's @RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there, my friend. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I hope that you're not tricking yourself into thinking that you're good, because remember, my friend, you are actually good. You are a massive ledge, and you deserve the best, my friends, alright? Like love, happiness, and success, and do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. Big love to you. Now go out there and absolutely smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.